Politics with Flo. I am your host, Flo, and today's topic has to do with the obvious. I'm sure all of you have probably heard at this point is the assassination of Charlie Kirk, right? I didn't think I would ever have to do something like this, right? Because just to be upfront and be very, very frank, I was not a fan of him, right? I was not a follower of Charlie Kirk, obviously for many reasons, right? But seeing the gruesome video, and I don't know how many of you guys have actually seen it. It just hit a little different, right? Not gonna get into the details because it's very, very gruesome. But for me, I was at work. I got the messages from one of my siblings, and at first I was like, "What's going on?" And sure enough, found out that he was dead. Right now, like I said, this is a guy who was very open about his beliefs. He was a self-proclaimed Christian and, pretty conservative. Nothing to hide about him, right? He was very, very open about the things that he said. With that said, at first when they announced his assassination, they did mention that it was an older man who had, done the deed or whatever you want to call it. But then they were like, oh, no, it's not him. We haven't found the guy. And then I think it was a few days ago, or I think yesterday, to be honest, where they found the suspect in the murder, the assassination. And it is a white male who was raised in a conservative household from the looks of it. Now his political affiliations are not confirmed yet. We don't know if he's a liberal, if he's a leftist, if he's a conservative, right? There's many speculations that he is one or the other, right? We don't know. We don't really know. And I waited this long to make this video because I did not want to put out misinformation, and but at the same time I also did not want to wait to see what else comes up. These are sentiments that I wanted to get out because people have been asking me, how do you feel about the situation? Do you agree with it? Because I've seen so many different reactions to what's going on with Charlie Kirk's assassination, right? I've seen people who are distraught, right? People who are just devastated with the assassination. And I also see people who are laughing about it, right? Who are the complete opposite, right? As far as myself, how do I feel about the situation? Like I said, Charlie Kirk was very inflammatory with his commentary. Charlie Kirk was very open about how he felt about specific people, right? So do I feel like he was a victim? No, right? With that said, do I think that he should have been assassinated? Absolutely not. Because although I disagree with probably pretty much everything he talked about, I don't think, maybe probably like, Christian values, right? Other than that, I wouldn't really agree with him on a lot of things. I don't think anybody deserves to go out that way, right? Especially if you're having a political discourse, especially if you're disagreeing with people. And his method was to go out into the colleges, which is where you are supposed to learn how to have discourse and be able to critically think, right? That is the last place where somebody should be killed, right? So I don't agree with it. I don't agree with him being taken out, right? But with that said, like I said, I also don't see him as a victim because prior to him saying that, I know he was very pro Second Amendment, and I know he mentioned something along the lines of like, people have to die to have this amendment still be part of the Constitution or whatnot. So, it's almost like he manifested what happened to him. Again, I don't condone it. I don't condone the violence at all. I am not a violent person. I am as peaceful as they can get, right? At least I try to be as peaceful as they can get. So, it is not something that I think we should be doing. And with that said, right, especially for those who are, more on the left side or liberal side, who are like, well, who cares? Is this a guy who was a racist, a bigot, whatever? Even if you believe that, or even if you see him in that way, for you to be praising it that he is no longer here, or that he was taken out the way that he was taken out, Personally speaking, I think it says a lot about you. It also shows me that your empathy is very selective, right? And I know that liberals and I would say liberals more than leftists. Leftists are not very empathetic. They say they are, but they're not. Liberals, I think claim to be more empathetic. So if you consider yourself to be a liberal, right? And if you're cheering for this, or if you're like, oh, this is like whatever, um, it's hypocritical because again, you might not have agreed with whatever he said and probably most of the things that he said, but for you to be cheering it and for you to be, like, okay, who cares? Then it shows that you're not really empathetic, right? And again, it's not about him. It's not even about Charlie Kirk because yes, this is a guy who got assassinated, but it's just when you watch that video and you see the brutality in that video, you can't help but to have humanity. Even for someone like him who was very controversial, right? I saw that thing and I'm just like, this is insane. That somebody was willing to go to that extent of doing that act because they did not agree with whatever he said. Now, there's speculations that, that maybe the person who killed him again was farther right than him. And the other one is that obviously he was a leftist or left-leaning or liberal, whatever. But even that, right? It doesn't matter what he was. The person who took him out, to me, it's just like we got into the point where we cannot have political discourse now without feeling like your life can be taken away. Now, I am nowhere near the level of Charlie Kirk as far as influence. I recognize that very, very clearly. But it does make me reflect on whether I want to keep doing this as far as like politics, right? Talking about controversial topics. And I don't really talk about them too much, right? And again, I try to be as unbiased as possible whenever I report something or talk about something. But there's still people out there who can take a simple clip out of my videos and, if they don't like me, they can just paint me in a certain way. And I think that is what we're seeing with Charlie Kirk on both the left and the right, because, you're seeing the extreme opposite of like the right saying, oh, this guy was a saint. He was for the people, for youth. He cared about saving America, right? And yeah, maybe for some folks that is the case. But as far as like, again, the rhetoric, it was inflammatory. Let's not beat around the bush. Let's not lie to ourselves. He might have said, things that were inspiring to some, but then to others, they felt like they were being oppressed, right? So this is the thing about analyzing human beings is that you cannot put somebody on a pedestal because nobody is. Nobody is perfect. So I think both of those things can be true at the same time, right? Because it depends on the perspective, right? Those that he touched see him as a saint. And those that he hurt see him as a complete opposite of a saint, see him as a monster, right? And for me, when this became real was when my own daughter asked me. She asked me, Dad, why did they kill this man? So as a father, right, I feel for his kids, for his wife. But this is where I have to be responsible with my words, right? Because if I paint him in a certain way, if I say this guy was a monster, then what I'm initially telling my daughter is it's okay to kill monsters if we don't like them, right? And now I didn't say that, obviously, because, my daughter's 7, so I'm not going to say that. So in a nutshell, I said, he said some things that people didn't like, and that person that took his life, thought it was okay to do it. And that's the best way I can explain it. If you can explain it to a child, I think that really makes you reflect on how you would portray this individual, right? Don't condone the violence, but again, I don't think he's a victim at the same time. I think there is freedom of speech, but as one of my mentors would say, who can say what they want without consequence? Shout outs to Jason Gamble out there if you're watching this, right? So, yeah, that's how I feel about this. This is how I feel about the situation. Um, it's it's um it's not that easy to explain, right? Because it is not something that I condone as somebody who tries to have discourse. This is how I started, is having discourse. Obviously, it was mainly through online. It was never really in person. But it makes you consider, do you want to keep doing this, right? Especially if you're not making money out of it, because I'm not. I'm going to be very upfront about this. I'm not making any money out of this. I didn't get into doing this to make money. I did it to try to have conversations. But if that means that somebody can take your life, then is it even worth doing this, right? So, I've thought about it. I've reflected on it. And at the same time, it's just, through my conversations with people that I know personally, both left and the right, somewhere in the middle, liberals, whatever, because I talk to everybody. I really do, right? I'm a curious person. I try to see why you think the way you think. And I'm very rarely emotionally charged when I talk to somebody. And even if I am, right, I will not express that because I want to continue the discourse. But, my friends or my colleagues or whatever, people on the right, again, see him as a hero. And those who are on the left see him as a monster, right? And I think both can be true at the same time. But with that said, I do not believe that this is the way we should handle discourse and disagreement. Absolutely not. Do not condone it. So anybody who is, right, ask yourself this. If you claim to be empathetic, then where's your empathy for his kids, for his wife, even for him? Again, even though he did say some things that were inflammatory, right? Because your empathy cannot be selective. At least if you're going to be telling folks that you're empathetic or that we should have empathy for people, right? It can't. I don't believe it can, right? This is why I don't virtue signal in my post, because personally, right, I'm gonna be very, very upfront, and this might sound controversial to some, right? But I'm gonna keep it 100, right? Most things that do not affect me personally, right, I am not emotionally invested. And that may sound harsh to a lot of folks, and that may come as a surprise to some people, but I think this is the way most people think. However, most people don't want to say that because you don't want to come across as somebody who doesn't care about people, right? Now, that doesn't mean that I wish people, the worst, or that I wish that, they have no empathy at all. I mean, of course, if you're empathetic, then, for sure, I don't have anything against it. But I am not going to lie to myself and say that I'm emotionally invested in most things that happen in the world, because I'm not. And not because I don't want to care or because I don't care. It's just that I'm not emotionally invested into many things, right? Because I recognize that if you are, one, most things you can't do shit about. Let's just be really, really, really honest about that. You may want to, you may try to, you may want to feel like you're doing something good for the world, and that's fine, go ahead and do that. But realistically, you have no power for the most part, right? And again, this might sound controversial to some, and this might sound like, man, where is this coming from, Flo? Like, do you not care about people? I do, right? But those who I have a connection with, and I think I mentioned this before, right? Obviously, I have a lot of acquaintances, I have a lot of people that I talk to. But if I don't know you on a personal level, I can't lie to myself and say I have an emotional connection with you, right? So this is why I don't do the whole pandering or the whole let's be in unity, let's be allies for everybody, because I know I cannot physically, I don't have the capacity to do that. As much as I would want to, right? I am not going to be able to do that. So why lie to myself and the people who listen to me, right? So I have not posted anything that says, oh, let's all feel bad for Charlie. I haven't done that because I didn't have an emotional connection to him, right? Again, I don't feel good about the situation, right? But for most things that happen, I just report. And you can critique me on that, and that's fine. I don't take it personally, but that is my take on that. I just wanted to be honest about that because I don't want people to think that I'm here to save the world or try to or whatever, right? My emotional investment is going to be in my family, in my daughter, and those around me, right? Because that is what I'm capable of emotionally investing in, right? My community to some extent, right? As far as I can contribute, but what is beyond my control, I do not invest myself into that because it is pointless. As somebody who has been chronically sick for over 10 years, if you guys didn't know, I am a person who has a chronic illness. It is very, very difficult to invest yourself emotionally in things, even my own personal problems, right? That triggers it. So imagine me trying to invest myself emotionally into all these things that I have no control over. I'd be sick all the time. So it's a personal choice to keep myself sane and happy, right? So with that being said, I don't know if I want to continue to make these types of videos that are related to politics. Who knows? Maybe if enough folks, listen to the content, and I'm not doing that to get people to play my stuff. It's not even that. It's like people are set in their ways. That's what I've realized is that most folks are just set in their ways and they don't care about changing their mind. Most folks are not open to having a discourse, as you saw in the situation. This is the extreme of it, right? So what's the point? What is the point of talking to people if they're still going to be set in their ways? Most adults do not want to change their minds. Most adults have made up their mind about what they are, who they are, right? We all have our biases and whatever, our values or whatever. And you can bring people facts. You can bring people tons of research and they just do not care. Some folks have even told me, like, I am okay with lying to people. I'm not going to mention their names, but they've told me this. So knowing that, well, what is the point of engaging in discourse? Knowing you're lying to yourself, right? Am I going to risk myself, what I've built, for what? Right? So I thought about that. Again, I don't know if I'm going to make that decision. Maybe I'm being a little emotional with that to some extent, right? But yeah, I don't really get on here anymore anyway too much. More invested in other things. But yeah, I've definitely considered that, definitely thought about it, and we'll see where it goes. Maybe I continue. I don't want to make any commitments regarding that because maybe something comes up or I do feel the need to come back and talk about it, but I have considered it for sure. Right after I saw this, I was like, do I want to stop? Right. But who knows? Maybe I'm just here talking to myself. And yeah. Well, on that note, this is Flo again. And thanks for watching. If you do engage in my stuff, I appreciate it. If not, it's all good. No hard feelings, but so the next one, maybe, right? If not, I'm still going to make content for sure. That will always be the case. What about? Will depend on the situation. Politics, maybe not for a while. Maybe not ever. Maybe we'll see. Until the next video, whatever it is, peace out.